So, ladies and gentlemen, it's gone 3:30 and I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us. My name is Anthony Beverley. I'm the Chair of the Board of Directors of Arvida Group Limited. Welcome to the annual meeting of Arvida. I'm pleased to confirm that we have a quorum in attendance today and can therefore declare the 2023 annual meeting open. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to make the following introductions. Joining me at the front table is our Board of Directors, Susan Peterson, Michael Ambrose, Paul Ridley-Smith, and I'd like to register an apology for Susan Patterson, who unfortunately can't join us today. We unfortunately had to change the meeting at a late stage, and Susan had a pre-commitment she couldn't get out of, and so she sends her apologies. Also joining Jeremy Nicol, our Chief Executive Officer, and Mark Wells on the front table. Mark's our Chief Financial Officer, of course. And I also acknowledge the attendance of other members of our executive team who you'll have a chance to meet and chat with later after the meeting. Attending are also representatives of our group auditors, Ernst & Young, welcome. Chapman Tripp, welcome to you, and our shared registrar, Computershare. Just a couple of matters, please, to note before we start for your information. In the unlikely event of an emergency that requires an evacuation, please follow our staff and wardens down the stairs, out and across, assemble under the oak tree. Bathrooms are located just outside the doors as well as downstairs. The minutes of the 2022 annual meeting were approved by the board on the 10th of October 2022. Those minutes are available for inspection if anyone needs one from the registrar. The notice of meeting was provided within the time required under the company's constitution, and I propose to note that the notice of meeting be taken as read. So dealing with the order of events for today, I will shortly address the meeting before handing over to Jeremy for his address and review of the year to 2023 March. After that, we will be happy to take questions on the annual report, financial statements and the auditor's report. I then intend to move to the formal part of the meeting. As you will have seen in the notice of meeting, we have 4 resolutions to consider today. We will cover each resolution in turn. The first and second relate to the re-election of directors. The third resolution relates to the increase in director fees, and the fourth is to obtain the board's authority to approve the auditor's remuneration. After each resolution is read, there will be an opportunity to ask questions before voting on that resolution. Following the formal business, there will be an opportunity to raise any other questions relating to Arvida under general business. I would note the meeting is being recorded for subsequent upload to our website. Turning now to my address. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to address you today, with this being my 9th year as a director and 2nd as chair. The business has become a considerably larger entity than when we first listed with 18 villages in 2014. We have quickly become a leading provider of retirement living and aged care services, and as you know, now operate 36 villages nationwide, providing services to more than 6,750 residents. And we are well positioned to continue to grow and deliver on our strategic goals. Notwithstanding, 2023 again presented a number of difficult challenges for the business. Performance through the first part of the year was heavily impacted by New Zealand's Omicron outbreak. While a recent experience, and hopefully one that will not be repeated in the near term, we should not underestimate the impact of the pandemic on aged care worldwide. Our older residents and those with core morbidities were the most at risk of serious health outcomes from infection, and our primary focus was to keep COVID out. Our approach continued to prioritise residents and our team wellbeing, and we again implemented a number of precautions, but these did come at a cost, while few subsidies were provided by the government to support our response. The result was lower care profitability, as admissions were restricted in an environment of higher operating costs. Once through the worst of the Omicron outbreak, we saw an improvement in care occupancy and revenue performance as settings began to normalise. As a board, we do consider our strategy during the pandemic was the right one and entirely aligned with our purpose, our values, and our priority and focus on and investing in our people. We did actually receive really positive feedback from residents and family on our approach, which was great. Through this period, the residential property market also faced its own challenges, with a material reduction in buyer demand. The number of days to sell a house increased, and pricing and volumes continued to decline. This had a material impact on general market liquidity as buyers paused, waiting for more favourable purchase conditions. While our village prices remained quite resilient over this period, the impact on us was an increase in settlement timeframes and an associated increase in working capital. Operating performance and cash flows were also impacted by inflation, particularly in wages and construction costs, as well as severe weather events in January and February of this calendar year. In this environment, with a number of factors negatively impacting performance, we were pleased to report a resilient set of financial results. For the 12 months ending 31st of March 2023, our underlying profit was $88 million, up a significant 20% on the prior year. So facing the challenges of a global pandemic and a deteriorating residential property market, we focused hard on aspects of the business over which we had a level of control, with an imperative of making sure we were offering our residents and the market an outstanding, market-leading village living and care experience. Absolutely critical. We do believe that this was a key contributor to our sales performance, where in a weak property market, demand and pricing for Arvida units remains strong. The level of sales and continued momentum reflects positively on the relative appeal of our product, on our underlying business culture, and our residential living and care offering. Embedded value now represents an estimated $1.1 billion of future cash flows. It is fairly clear that New Zealand's ageing population will continue to drive demand for aged care services and retirement living options. At the same time, continued underfunding of the sector by the government is accelerating retirement living demand as older New Zealanders look to lock in their care options early. Provision of care will remain a core part of our strategy, as we believe a continuum of care offering is an essential part of our business. However, we do continue to be very concerned about government underfunding in the wider aged care sector. Arvida is part of a group called Aged Care Matters that spent much of the year lobbying government about the serious risks facing the sector from underfunding. More than 1,200 aged care beds closed in New Zealand in 2022. And a number of key providers have recently advised that they intend to reduce the care component of their business. This having the obvious outcome of progressively reducing care capacity across the country. With nowhere else to go, the public health system becomes the only care option for many older people. With the number of New Zealanders aged over 75 years expected to grow by more than 75% over the next 15 years, this obviously becomes unsustainable. Supply of care beds cannot be turned on overnight, actually. It takes around 3 years to plan, build and commission a new 60-bed care centre. This suggests access to quality care will likely be at a premium in the years to come. While future demand remains clear, building material shortages and elevated build costs have meant that we have taken a more cautious approach to the type and volume of projects we are currently undertaking. Development capital expenditure has been tapered, with our annual build rate now closer to 200 units, which is considerably lower than the 300 units we had anticipated to be building at this stage. We have reduced our capital expenditure commitments to ensure our capital position remains robust and appropriate for the current risk and opportunities, and our balance sheet remains strong. You will be aware that during the year, the market also increased its focus on the sector's capital capacity and management. This driven by increased funding costs and by capital constraints faced by some of our competitors. The board and senior executives spent considerable time re-examining and ratifying our capital management framework to ensure we were closely monitoring our capital sources and supply and matching our capital capacity to our commitments. Gearing at 31% was the lowest in the sector at balance state and within the board's target range of 25 to 35%. Maintaining a conservatively geared balance sheet in the current environment is critically important to the company. The imperative here is to make sure our capital position is not only strong defensively in the event the market remains difficult for longer, but also to have a capital capacity to capture suitable opportunities to continue to develop and enhance the portfolio as appropriate. Dividend policy is a key part of our capital management framework. Our challenge, as we have grown, has been to set a sustainable dividend policy which aims to pay dividends to be funded from cash flow from operations. Clearly, market events have resulted in significant cash flow volatility over the past couple of years. Through this period, we have maintained a dividend stream as we recognise a large number of our shareholders value regular dividend payments. However, in balancing the payment of dividends against the capital requirements of the company, including the requirement to fund the growth of our portfolio, the board has adopted a lower distribution range of 30 to 50% of full-year underlying profit going forward. Dividends are expected to be at the bottom end of this revised payout range until operating conditions improve and business cash flows mature. Over time, we would expect to see an uplift in resale gains and realisation of deferred management fees, along with increases in care and village fees, which will improve the cash flow performance of our operations. In terms of governance, with Arvida having operated since 2014, the board is comprised of directors that were appointed around the time of our listing, which means that Arvida has the slightly unusual situation of the majority of its directors having similar board tenure. Given this, our board composition and succession plan now has an increased concentration on director rotation, with the process focused on the careful selection and appointment of new directors with the skills and experience required by the board and the company at the time, balanced against the requirement to preserve board stability, company and sector knowledge, and overall performance. We anticipate that we will add another director to the board this year to facilitate director rotation, and with the focus of regulators and the broader market intensifying in the areas of audit, compliance and reporting, particularly in the expanding areas of sustainability, environmental, risk management and disclosure. At this stage, the focus is likely to be on introducing a director with strong capability and experience in these areas. Any changes to the board will of course be announced to shareholders in the market as appropriate. I would like to mention the separate sector reviews being undertaken by the Commerce Commission and the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. Both are scrutinising different aspects of the retirement sector. There are some 200 operators involved in the sector, and while practices vary across the operators, all are governed by legislation that requires occupational right agreements to be signed off only after appropriate legal advice has been obtained by the resident. Considerable effort has been made to ensure our occupation right agreements are written in plain English and adopt best practice terms. Feedback on the resident experience is obtained every year through our resident survey, with the sales and contracting experience forming part of that survey. However, improvements to the residents' quality of experience will always be welcomed, and we look forward to keeping you updated on progress with these reviews. Looking forward, COVID is expected to have less of an impact on business performance and as transmission rates decline. We are also seeing early signs of improved liquidity in the residential property market, which is flowing through to sales activity. However, the general election in the third quarter is likely to result in a period of uncertainty for the market. This is expected to have an impact on New Zealand's economic activity. So, acknowledging the uncertainties around economic and market conditions, we believe Arvida is well positioned to continue to progress and deliver shareholder value. We are rebalancing our focus across residents, teams and shareholders as we move out of the COVID environment and hopefully transition into a stronger residential market. So in concluding my address, ladies and gentlemen, I would note that while market conditions remain challenging, the business is in good shape. We have an outstanding living and aged care offering, and our aspiration is for this to lead the market. Our product is well positioned, and we have achieved strong sales in a difficult sales environment. Our balance sheet is strong, and we remain well positioned to continue to grow the portfolio in target markets. albeit that we are taking a more cautious approach to capital commitments at this stage. Before I hand over to Jeremy, I would like to acknowledge and thank the wider Arvida team for an outstanding effort and contribution to the business during the year. This was not an easy operating environment, and it's fantastic to see the approach taken by the team and the result that's been achieved. I would particularly acknowledge the effort of the team during the Auckland flood crisis earlier in the year, which saw our villages in one case quite badly damaged, but with our residents and our team members safe and sound. I now invite Jeremy to provide you with a more detailed coverage of the business performance and activities.
Thank you, Anthony. Welcome, everyone. Tēnā koutou katoa. It's always good to come to Christchurch for the AGM and just see a whole bunch of familiar faces in the crowd, so thank you for coming along today. As Anthony was just talking about, Arvida is well positioned. When you look at our track record of providing an outstanding lifestyle for older New Zealanders, and this is evidenced through our very high Net Promoter Scores, which is based on the feedback we receive from residents, our strong team engagement scores, and external awards such as CanStar and awards from the Retirement Villages Association. We are seeing record levels of demand from people wishing to live in an Arvida village. After experiencing some tough times over the pandemic, our benefits of safety, security, lifestyle and community are highly valued. We are in a position with a very strong balance sheet, and we have a very disciplined approach about how we manage our capital base, with a keen focus on ensuring we invest in the right locations at the right time. The business has performed incredibly well. We delivered a record profit result, with our key profitability measure of underlying profit up 20% to $88 million. Our annuity EBITDA was also up an impressive 30% to $84 million. As Anthony mentioned, our care performance was impacted by Omicron, and this was a drag on our earnings performance. Care occupancy in the first half was materially lower, as we restricted admissions into some care centres and closed wings in others. By year end, occupancy had recovered to 94%, which is near our long-term average. Through this period, we also incurred elevated employee costs with additional staffing levels, rosters and payments to support our frontline teams. This was estimated at around $4 million of additional costs. Rapid inflation headlined in the media throughout 2023, and we saw the impacts of inflation broadly across all cost lines. Generally, just being a bigger business saw an increase in operating expenditure following the acquisition of the 6 villages in the prior period. The various cost pressures and revenue constraints contributed to the operating cash flows being broadly flat year on year. A strong sales performance was really the highlight of 2023's underlying performance. The team achieved record resale and new sales settlements of $376 million, which was up 16% on FY22. Resale gains increased 59% to $69 million, with an average gross proceeds per settlement up 17% to just under $600,000. Increased unit pricing across the portfolio contributed strongly to the improved result. This resulted in a significantly higher resale margin being achieved at 32%, with resales from the arena villages averaging much higher margins and contributing to this margin increase. We also settled 197 new sales. This was 46 fewer than the prior period, but the total sales value at $156 million was similar. Sales have continued to track well at our larger development sites of Bethlehem Shores, Queenstown Country Club, Te Puna Wairoa and Waimea Plains. The completion of the roads on Cashmere Care Suites saw good sales progress in the sell-down of both care suites and apartments at that site. Development gains of $27.8 million were up 10% on the prior period. Unit pricing is a key input into the valuations that are completed annually by CBRE and JLL. Whilst the price of residential houses increased significantly at the start of the pandemic, we increased our pricing at a more moderate rate. This meant that while prices of residential houses have decreased about 20% last year, we still had a buffer to increase the average pricing of our units across the year by around 8%. However, we did see valuers reduce their near-term growth rates in assessing the fair value of our communities. This contributed to a lower level of increase in the valuations, which in FY23 was $80 million compared to $159 million in the prior period. Together, the value of the development activity in progress investment property increased about $400 million to $3.4 billion. As shown in the chart, the embedded value increased to now be over $1.1 billion. The step up that you can see in the chart in FY22 was as a result of the Arena acquisition. The embedded value in those 6 communities continued to increase and was $435 million at 31 March 2023, as compared to $385 million at the time of acquisition. On a per share basis, embedded value represents $1.56, and our net tangible assets per share represents $1.90. Both of these are currently at a significant premium to the share price. The embedded value calculation is a point-in-time estimate of the cash that would be realised from selling all of our units at the current price today. It does not include any future growth in unit pricing, sell-down of completed stock, or the value derived from our significant development opportunity within our land bank. Total net debt at the end of the year increased to $615 million. Although higher than last year, our gearing ratio remained within the target range and was in the lowest of the sector at 31%. During the year, we also welcomed a third bank, ASB, into our banking syndicate and increased the facility by around $150 million. We do have a very competitive market for healthcare workers currently. Borders reopening and inclusion of nurses on the green list has certainly helped, and we are seeing a greater inwards flow of CVs from both domestic and offshore applicants. We advocated very strongly for better pay for our registered nurses, and the latest round of funding increase does go some way to address the gap. Workforce is our second largest expense behind development expenditure, and to better position our business to attract talent and improve workforce retention, we have invested in defining our employee proposition. The ambition is to be the employer of choice in the sector. Substantial focus was placed on understanding our current state before developing a people strategy. The discovery phase engaged leaders across the business, which was an important part of the journey. Developing a truly compelling employee proposition will take time. We are only in the early stages of our journey, which is going to take us 2 or 3 years more to complete. Already we have seen improvements in key indicators such as engagement and retention. Both contribute to delivering a differentiated resident experience, as well as driving profitability and reputation. And as the CEO of this business, I'm incredibly proud of the team members that go above and beyond every day for our residents, especially when you think this is a 24-hour-a-day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year business. So it is relentless, and our team do a wonderful job. Now, the best advocates for our business are our residents. So results from the resident surveys that cover both those living independently and those living in care indicate a highly satisfied constituency with exceptionally high results. Through these surveys, we look to highlight areas where we need to actively make improvements. Survey results are shared with the board, senior executive management teams, village managers, and we put a high degree of rigour into ensuring the results are shared with village teams and residents. This year we won CanStar's Blue's Most Satisfied Customer Award in the retirement category, and Arvida was the only retirement village provider to earn CanStar Blue's top 5-star rating and award for overall satisfaction. Our first national brand campaign, Live the Age You Feel, looked to portray positive perceptions around our residents' well-being and the social connections within an Arvida community. We think the campaign has been highly successful. Audiences are now more familiar with who Arvida is and our retirement living proposition. And I do believe a few years back, might have been Trevor, asked the question, or Charlie, when are we going to do some more work in that brand? So hopefully you enjoyed that. And the advert was filmed here at Park Lane. During the year, we also continued to advance our sustainability objectives. We have a very passionate head of sustainability within our business, and she's continued to drive really strong engagement across the business on sustainability initiatives. Reducing the amount of waste going to landfill was a key target for the team, and while the goal was ambitious, some communities did more than a 20% reduction. More importantly, it encouraged our village teams and residents to think and learn more about the waste they generate daily. In a separate initiative, we focused on food waste, and the work done by the team led to funding being made available to the sector by the Ministry of the Environment. This will be New Zealand's first whole sector project to reduce food waste. This is a great accolade for the team, as it will hopefully see benefits shared across the sector. We have also had targets set for emissions reduction. From a 2020 base year, we were targeting a 20% reduction in emissions by 2025 and 50% by 2030. To help us meet these targets, we have developed an emissions reduction model and plan, and we are well progressed to meeting these targets with a number of initiatives in place. Collectively, our stakeholders have numerous and changing demands on the way the business conducts itself. We endeavour to maintain the right balance as these demands continue to evolve and to treat everyone in line with our values. The updated Health and Disability Standard, Ngā Puera, came into effect in February 2022, with a staged approach taken by the Ministry of Health to implementation and criteria attainment. The standard introduces a variety of new requirements that focus on addressing equity, particularly for New Zealand's Maori and Pasifika people. Arvida has embraced with the positive changes within the implementation of these standards at both an organisation-wide level and per care centre. To reflect the increased people focus across the business, the remit of our remuneration committee has also been expanded to encompass a broader consideration of people issues. Over the next couple of slides, I will focus on some of our development highlights. Last year, we delivered 215 new homes across 10 sites. 164 of these homes were delivered in the second half alone. It was a very busy period for the construction teams, particularly given the disruption of it says here, a wet summer. I don't think we actually had a summer in Auckland. It was just wet. The weather events over summer resulted in the delivery of the Aria Bay development in Auckland being delayed. This building is being handed over next week, so it'll be exciting to be able to finish that project. Our 2024 build program is targeting a similar level of deliveries to 2023. Aria Bay is the only high-density development to be delivered this year, with all other deliveries being villas. Broadly, all of our new developments are villa-led, with a target composition of around 200 villas and 30 to 50 care suites. We are no longer looking to build serviced apartments or traditional care beds, as both are effectively replaced by building care suites. With the addition of 2 further development sites during the year, our land bank has increased to around 2,200 units, and the majority of this, around 70%, is represented by villas. So we'll just have a quick look at some lovely photos. So this is Lauriston Park in Cambridge. So we opened the new care centre building, which is in the bottom right, last month. There's 63 care suites in there, and we're about halfway through the sell down. So it's gone incredibly well for us. And as you can see to the side and behind, we also have a further 198 villas on site in Cambridge. Aria Bay, so the 2 buildings we're doing at the moment are the one in the bottom right and the next one across. So they contain 57 new apartments. As I said, the builder is finishing next week, and then we'll look to do handover, and residents would be able to move in from September. We'd also completed a care suite building at the top of the photo several years ago, and this will finish the work at Aria Bay, which is going to be an exciting feat for our team. Up into Puna Waiora and Kerikeri, you can see there we have 65 villas complete, and the clubhouse, which is located just to the left of the driveway, you can't see it in the photo, is well underway, and I've been promised that it's going to be open in time for the residents' Christmas do, so fingers crossed. It's got a roof on it, so it doesn't matter if it rains too much. Whai Moriora is the first stage of villas in Te Awamutu. We're looking to open the site officially in October, so that site's looking fantastic. On the next slide, we've got Bethlehem Shores. This is the basement build for the new care and apartments building. It will have 54 care suites and 53 apartments. This is going to be a very premium product. We'll have fantastic views across the harbour, looking straight out at Mount Maunganui. In Queenstown Country Club, we're also building a care and apartments building, 62 care suites and 29 apartments. Top floor care and top floor apartments there. We're going to have amazing views of the mountains. And this is just a snapshot of our latest acquisition in Warkworth, which is just north of Auckland. There's a brand new motorway extension that comes through to about here, and there's a link road that now links up to our site. The site is just north of Warkworth and on the way to Matakana, and on the left-hand side of the picture, our site also borders the local golf course. As you'll see, that is quite a big bit of land, so we are looking to carve out a piece for our retirement village, and then we'll work through the sale of the balance of the land. So in summarising what the year ahead looks like, the key health indicators for the economy and property market are beginning to steady and show signs of improvement, and with less likelihood the economy is going to have a hard landing. Immigration is positive. The residential housing market is showing some signs of life, with volumes and pricing up in some regions, and the supply of new houses is falling. The rate of inflation has eased, with most New Zealand trading partners also recording similar trends. However, we still have an election coming up in about 80 days, I believe. Shortages in the care workforce have mostly stabilised over the last couple of months, with more inbound inquiry being received. Te Whatu Ora announced an 8.6 to 11.3% increase in our care funding rates, and these increases were effective from the start of this month. COVID in the broader community has continued to reduce. This is positive for continued normalisation of our care operations and occupancy. Pending regulatory reviews and the sector focus have been announced. The timeline for both is uncertain, and with the likely outcome being a modernisation of the Retirement Villages Act and some changes to consumer protections. As you can see in the chart, investors have been gaining more confidence in the resilience of the sector as this environment improves and risks to the downside lessen. We are already up nearly 40% from our March low, but obviously there's a long way from the highs of 2021. From a strategy perspective, we are still focused on building a platform positioned for sustainable growth by realising the identified development opportunities within our existing portfolio, and by continuing to add accretive opportunities to the portfolio over the longer term, we will be driving growth in cash flows and total returns. Our strategic priorities are ensuring disciplines are applied around capital deployment, investing in critical areas of the business such as our people, our IT platform to mature capabilities and enhance productivity, and focus on cash management with a number of strategies in place to increase the cash capture of the business. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeremy. So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our overview of the company's activities for the 2023 financial year. Before we move into the formal part of the day, we would be happy to answer questions on the company's performance generally, or on the financial statements and auditor's report, which you can find on pages 149 to 181 of the annual report. I do ask that you limit your questions at this time to the financial statements, auditor's report, and company activities. You will have an opportunity to ask questions relating to the formal business shortly. I would like to remind you that only shareholders, proxy holders, or shareholder company representatives have a right to speak at this time. In addressing the meeting, would you please state your name and advise whether you are a shareholder, a proxy holder, or a shareholder company representative, and if a proxy or a representative, the name of the shareholder you are representing today. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. Do I have any questions from the floor, please? Thank you.
Brent Marshall, shareholder. Jeremy, you mentioned the advertising campaign being particularly successful. Pleased to see that roll out. Is that now concluded, and is there a subsequent version of that plan, or an ongoing campaign?
Right, is it on? Yep. So we believe we've still got a bit of life left in the current ad campaign. And we've just put off investing in a new advert until probably the next financial year. You will see it predominantly through the Rugby World Cup, and we've also, I'm not sure if I can say or not, but I'll tell you anyway. From 1st of August, we're also going to be a primary sponsor of the Mike Hoskins show. So if anybody listens to Mike Hoskins, oh, there's one shaking the head. Yeah, so we'll be on there too.
Thank you. Murray Isaacs, shareholder. Future dividends, which was mentioned in your annual report. Ian, I just like to read out what I've noted down here. In your end of year highlights, is the change of dividend payout range being reduced to 30-50% of the underlying profit, and your expectations for the year ended 24 being at the bottom end of the amended range. As one of the original shareholders who contacted me personally said, not ideal for us retirees, not a highlight for us. Some of the background: I was chair of numerous syndicates that helped make up the 17 villages from which Arvida was formed. At those shareholders' meetings, the main discussion was always over future dividends and the ability for them to continue. We were given assurance from Bill McDonald and Peter Wilson that this would be the case and were to be paid quarterly. I can tell you that was one of the only reasons that we got the backing from the syndicate members, and I must say it was touch and go with a couple of them. But we managed to get them across the line in the end, and that was the birth of Arvida. Many people in this room, most of them now, like me, retired, hanging out for their dividend. Just have a look around. A lot of them have got less hair than me, Ian. And the only one that I can see would have been at those meetings, maybe you were there, Ian, but Michael Ambrose was the only one present to witness those meetings. I see from Forsyth Bar's forecast for Arvida next year is a drop of another 1.35 cents, or 28% below this year, and is 36 below 2022, a huge reduction in our annual income. On this year's dividends payouts, you would need in excess of 2 million shares to cover the cost of one person in care. And with the forecasted reduction, this will continue to put financial pressure on those elder shareholders. So I am keen to hear what we can expect of the future and where do the original shareholders feature in your thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murray. Look, that's a very fair question that we anticipated was very much on the mind of some of the shareholders more than others. Let me just address that first, please, and then I'll ask the table if they would like to add any comments. But firstly, absolutely fair question. The imperative on the company and the board is actually to make sure that we're looking after all our stakeholders' interests. And when we turn to the shareholders' interests, we've got to look at that from the breadth of whole shareholding. So we've got to really say, look, what is Arvida's mandate and purpose? And very much the mandate of Arvida is to develop and maintain and enhance a portfolio that comprises village living and care offering. You'll see since we listed, the portion of our business that's care has dropped quite radically. You know, we were really high in the early days, it's now low, and part of the drivers for that is economic, and part of it is just the volume of the assets that we've bought in the mix. But getting back to the main point, Murray, the imperative on the board is to make sure that we are looking after our capital structure and balancing that with the requirements of the shareholders and our team. So you've got pressures about running the business in terms of how we resource it, paying our people property, which puts pressure on our underlying profit. So I think the answer I'm taking a bit of time to get to is that there are a number of pressures that drive that question. The overriding imperative for the board is to look after our capital structure, that we meet bank, and we meet our ability to fund the requirements of the company in terms of our dividend obligations and our ambitions, and critically our ability to grow the portfolio over time. Now the reality is if you're in that game for those multiple purposes, there are multiple calls on capital and different capital priorities. So where the stage of Arvida has got to is that it has transitioned from a smaller established portfolio to now going into a market that we want to be competing with our key competitors who are in the greenfields, brownfields business of growing the portfolio quite actively. And Arvida is now going into that space more actively than it has been in the past, which means we've got greenfield sites we never had in the early days, And we've got a really proactive focus on capturing the brownfield redevelopment opportunities we've got, which means we need capital to do that. So, again, a long-winded way to say we have competing calls on our capital. If we were to fulfil the mandate that you've just asked for or described, the vast majority of our income capital would be paid out in dividends. We've got a bank gearing rate at 31% as at balance date, and we've got a real caution about lifting bank into dangerous levels. So we're balancing the available cash we've got, part of that coming from our earnings, part of it coming from the ability to raise capital from the market, which is certainly not there in any sensible form at the moment. So part of that, of course, is using our dividends to fund part of that portfolio growth. So it's a trade-off. That's what it is. It's a trade-off to say, look, actually, what is our strategy? What are our imperatives? So the simple answer is we're trading off some of the dividend we could otherwise pay with the ability to grow the portfolio and grow shareholder value over time. But that's a judgment. There's no black and white, right or wrong answer about that. But it's driven from the strategy of the company, the mandate at the time, the economic environment. At the moment, we're driving that CapEx down because it's not the environment to take your debt levels up, and you just can't raise capital sensibly in the market. Wouldn't make any sense. So, that means that in order to fulfil those competing obligations for capital, the board has decided that we want to take the dividend payout down lower. The bucket that we'll dip into, the 30 to 50% dipping into the underlying profit bucket, the size of that bucket will also have a big influence on the amount we can pay out, of course. And we've seen under these market conditions with care profitability going down through occupancy and the government's reticent to provide adequate funding rates, care profitability has been under pressure. At the same time, we've had a massive blowout in our wages costs through registered nurses' costs and other staff costs. So it's been a bit of a perfect storm in terms of our ability to fill the bucket to pay out. But it's essentially a trade-off. And again, that's where the board has got to say, look, we absolutely recognise the matter you've raised. A high portion of our register is looking for regular dividends, but a high portion also is looking for growth in the portfolio. So we're trying to trade off those imperatives, and we just hope we've got the balance right. Absolutely recognise the point you make. Would anyone else like to add to that? Because it's an absolute topic of the day that we respect. Sir. Certainly. There's a microphone coming if you're happy to.
Yeah, David Benson, shareholder and a resident here in Park Lane.
David.
On the shareholding, what sort of percentage of shareholders are taking shares in lieu of dividend, and is that really helpful to you guys?
Mark, you? 32, yeah. So I hesitate because traditionally it varies, of course, but traditionally it's sort of 20 to 30% across the market. We've been, our early days, I think, was early 20s. It's crept up lately. It absolutely is of value to us because it's another source of capital, of course. Thank you.
Brent Marshall, shareholder. Jeremy, you mentioned the advertising campaign being particularly successful. Pleased to see that roll out. Is that now concluded, and is there a subsequent version of that planned or an ongoing campaign?
Right, is it on? Yep. So we believe we've still got a bit of life left in the current ad campaign, and we've just put off investing in a new advert until probably the next financial year. You will see it predominantly through the Rugby World Cup, and we've also, I'm not sure if I can say or not, but I'll tell you anyway. From 1st of August, we're also going to be a primary sponsor of the Mike Hoskins show. So if anybody listens to Mike Hoskins, oh, there's one shaking the head. Yeah, so we'll be on there too.
Thank you. Murray Isaacs, shareholder.
Right.
Future dividends, which was mentioned in your annual report, Ian. I just like to read out what I've noted down here. In your end of year highlights is the change of dividend payout range being reduced to 30-50% of the underlying profit, and your expectations for the year end of 24 being at the bottom end of the amended range. As one of the original shareholders who contacted me personally said, not ideal for us retirees, not a highlight for us. Some of the background, I was chair of numerous syndicates that helped make up the 17 villages from which Arvida was formed. At those shareholders' meetings, the main discussion was always over future dividends and the ability for them to continue. We were given assurance from Bill McDonald and Peter Wilson that this would be the case and were to be paid quarterly. I can tell you that was one of the only reasons that we got the backing from the syndicate's members, and I must say it was touch and go with a couple of them. But we managed to get them across the line in the end, and that was the birth of Arvida. Many people in this room, most of them now, like me, retired, hanging out for their dividend. Just have a look around. A lot of them have got less here than me, Ian. And the only one that I can see would have been at those meetings, maybe you were there, Ian, but Michael Ambrose was the only one present to witness those meetings. I see from Forsyth Bar's forecast for Arvida next year is a drop of another 1.35 cents or 28% below this year, and is 36 below 2022, a huge reduction in our annual income. On this year's dividends payouts, you would need in excess of 2 million shares to cover the cost of one person in care. And with the forecasted reduction, this will continue to put financial pressure on those elder shareholders. So I am keen to hear what we can expect of the future and where do the original shareholders feature in your thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murray. Look, that's a very fair question that we anticipated was very much on the mind of some of the shareholders more than others. Let me just address that first, please, and then I'll ask the table if they would like to add any comments. But firstly, absolutely fair question. The imperative on the company and the board is actually to make sure that we're looking after all our stakeholders' interests. And when we turn to the shareholders' interests, we've got to look at that from the breadth of whole shareholding. So we've got to really say, look, what is Arvida's mandate and purpose? And very much the mandate of Arvida is to develop and maintain and enhance a portfolio that comprises village living and care offering. You'll see since we listed, the portion of our business that's care has dropped quite radically. You know, we were really high in the early days, it's now low, and part of the drivers for that is economic, and part of it is just the volume of the assets that we've bought in the mix. But getting back to the main point, Murray, the imperative on the board is to make sure that we are looking after our capital structure and balancing that with the requirements of the shareholders and our team. So you've got pressures about running the business in terms of how we resource it, paying our people property, which puts pressure on our underlying profit. So I think the answer I'm taking a bit of time to get to is that there are a number of pressures that drive that question. The overriding imperative for the board is to look after our capital structure, that we meet bank, and we meet our ability to fund the requirements of the company in terms of our dividend obligations and our ambitions, and critically our ability to grow the portfolio over time. Now the reality is if you're in that game for those multiple purposes, there are multiple calls on capital and different capital priorities. So where the stage of Arvida has got to is that it has transitioned from a smaller established portfolio to now going into a market that we want to be competing with our key competitors who are in the greenfields, brownfields business of growing the portfolio quite actively. And Arvida is now going into that space more actively than it has been in the past, which means we've got greenfield sites we never had in the early days, and we've got a really proactive focus on capturing the brownfield redevelopment opportunities we've got, which means we need capital to do that. So again, a long-winded way to say we have competing calls on our capital. If we were to fulfil the mandate that you've just asked for or described, the vast majority of our income capital would be paid out in dividends. We've got a bank gearing rate at 31% as that balance state, and we've got a real caution about lifting bank into dangerous levels. So we're balancing the available cash we've got, part of that coming from our earnings, part of it coming from the ability to raise capital from the market, which is certainly not there in any sensible form at the moment. So part of that, of course, is using our dividends to fund part of that portfolio growth. So it's a trade-off. That's what it is. It's a trade-off to say, look, actually, what is our strategy? What are our imperatives? So the simple answer is we're trading off some of the dividend we could otherwise pay with the ability to grow the portfolio and grow shareholder value over time. But that's a judgment. There's no black and white, right or wrong answer about that. But it's driven from the strategy of the company, the mandate at the time, the economic environment. At the moment, we're driving that CapEx down because it's not the environment to take your debt levels up, and you just can't raise capital sensibly in the market. Wouldn't make any sense. So, that means that in order to fulfil those competing obligations for capital, the board has decided that we want to take the dividend payout down lower. The bucket that we'll dip into, the 30 to 50% dipping into the underlying profit bucket, the size of that bucket will also have a big influence on the amount we can pay out, of course. And we've seen under these market conditions with care profitability going down through occupancy and the government's reticent to provide adequate funding rates, care profitability has been under pressure. At the same time, we've had a massive blowout in our wages costs through registered nurses' costs and other staff costs. So it's been a bit of a perfect storm in terms of our ability to fill the bucket to pay out. But it's essentially a trade-off. And again, that's where the board has got to say, look, we absolutely recognise the matter you've raised. A high portion of our register is looking for regular dividends, but a high portion also is looking for growth in the portfolio. So we're trying to trade off those imperatives, and we just hope we've got the balance right. Absolutely recognise the point you make. Would anyone else like to add to that? Because it's an absolute topic of the day that we respect. Sir. Certainly. There's a microphone coming if you're happy to.
Yeah, David Benson, shareholder and a resident here in Park Lane.
David.
On the shareholding, what sort of percentage of shareholders are taking shares in lieu of dividend, and is that really helpful to you guys?
Mark, you 32, yeah. So I hesitate because traditionally it varies, of course, but traditionally it's sort of 20 to 30% across the market. We've been, our early days, I think, was early 20s. It's crept up lately. It absolutely is of value to us because it's another source of capital, of course. And, you know, the reality is in this market, and this is something the board and the management spent, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of time on this year. The market got badly bent out of shape with one of the operators in the sector getting its capital position wrong. And I'm not bagging that group because they're a respectable group doing good business, but they got caught by the capital model. This is a recycling capital model where our capital position depends on our ability to spend and then recoup the money through sales. They got caught. They had to go to the market. Firstly, they had to go to a funder, offshore, USPPP funder, and say, sorry, we've breached. And the USPP market is absolutely unforgiving. Some USPP markets would say, well, let's work it together and you have a long-term relation, let's do it. Over there, it's black and white. There is no discussion. You breach, out comes a contract, and you pay your penalty. I think the penalty was 139 mil in that case. The ability of that company to pay that, the only source of capital was to go to the market and issue a deeply discounted rights issue. And that destroyed a huge amount of shareholder value not only for that company, but it set the market up and said, my God, this capital market is difficult in these circumstances, and what are you other providers doing? And we're one of those. So absolutely long-winded way to answer your question. Yes, it's definitely valuable. It's one of the sources of capital we can tap into. And it's great, actually, because all shareholders get a chance to participate in it. Got to keep your discount a bit careful. You know, there's no black and white answer to that either. Sometimes it's no discount, so you can take the issue at par, or there might be a 2% discount. But again, it's available to everyone, so that's got some equity to it. It's only one of the capital sources alongside our suite of, but the beauty of it is it's available to the company and the shareholders if the board decides the circumstances right at all times, with some of the other sources that are harder at different times. Yep. That was a short answer. Look, we'll have a chance for general business later, but any other questions on particularly the financial statement and the auditor's report? Okay, look, as there are no further questions, we'll consider the financial statements and auditor's report to have been received. We will now consider the formal resolutions for the meeting. The resolutions for consideration today are all ordinary resolutions and may only be voted on by shareholders, either in person or by proxy, and proxy holders and shareholder company representatives present. I've been provided with a record of the valid proxies received, and proxies have been received in respect of 256,642,845 shares. So in terms of resolutions 1 and 2, both Paul and Michael have abstained from any consideration by the board on their re-election and will abstain from voting their shares and any discretionary proxies they hold on resolutions 1 and 2 respectively. In all other circumstances, undirected proxies held by the chair will be voted in the affirmative. On resolution 3, the directors and any of their associated persons will abstain from voting any of their shares and any incidental proxies they hold. I would note there are currently 727,975,669 shares on issue. Voting on all resolutions will be by poll. We will consider each resolution in turn and vote on that resolution after any discussion. I ask that you keep the questions strictly to the resolution under consideration. To vote, you should tick the relevant box on your voting form in respect of the resolution being voted on. If you did not bring your voting form with you, you should have been given one at the registration desk on arrival. If you are a proxy holder and the shareholder is given direction as to voting on the resolutions, you will not have been issued with a voting paper. If you are both a shareholder and a proxy holder or shareholder company representative, please complete separate voting paper for yourself and each shareholder you represent. If you have been overlooked, please let one of the Computershare representatives know immediately. On completion of voting, your forms will be collected and taken to be counted by Computershare. All resolutions will be voted on in the form proposed in the notice of meeting given to shareholders. Each of the resolutions is taken as having been moved and no seconder is required. The resolutions will be binding on the board and the company if passed. So moving to the resolutions to be considered. Resolution 1, in accordance with the company's constitution and the NZX listing rules, Paul Ridley-Smith will retire at this meeting. However, Paul offers himself for re-election. The board has determined that if Resolution 1 is passed, Paul will be an independent director for the purpose of the NZX listing rules. I now ask Paul to provide some comments supporting his re-election.
Good afternoon. So, I'm Paul Ridley-Smith. I've been here before a couple of times. I've been a director since shortly after listing in 2015. So look, rather than talk about my attributes, because you're unlikely to get a balanced view if I do that, I'd rather talk about how I see the company and how I see the prospects going forward. You've heard from Ant and Jeremy on the status. I'm very much a sort of a shareholder-focused person, and for me, FY23 was pretty disappointing in many respects, and by that I mean the share price performance. You can be 100% sure that I'm not happy with that. I'm not happy with the share price that goes from $2.10 to 92 cents or wherever it dropped to, although I'm pleased to see it back in the mid-120s. To answer gentleman who asked about dividends, think of that share price drop at its peak was 20 years of dividends lost in capital value. And to me, I think that from a shareholder point of view, personally, I think you should focus more on the capital value than on the dividend stream if you're thinking about the overall economic effect. But I'm pleased to see the share price has come back as I expect it should. In terms of why, there's the old saying that success has many fathers and failure is just an orphan. So I don't like the idea that we blame external factors for the drop, just like I don't like the fact that when the share price went well for 2 years, we claimed, not that we did, by the way, that we claimed all the credit. But of course, there are external factors, and they do have an effect. So we have to recognise that. I'm sure you do from your own life. But what I'd like you to take away from my presentation is that when you see those sort of stresses, I know I do, and I assure you the other directors are in exactly the same boat. Really work hard to think about what we can do better, how we can change the business, how we can refocus the business to create more enduring value for you. And that's why I'm in this game. And there are things we can do, and Jeremy's leading a strong team, and he's totally committed to this, but I can assure you that I'm committed, Ant's committed, the rest of us are, to improving performance going forward. There are things you can do in care. We're bringing in more technology, we're improving our systems that sit behind the delivery of care, which of course, as you know, is a highly labour-intensive service. We're focused on finding ways to maintaining a very high-quality care outcome, but doing it smarter and more efficiently. In the retirement village side, again, managing our construction costs, designing our villages so that they're really attractive, optimising the product that we sell to people so that when they come in, and of course Park Lane is one of our flagship villages, I must say, it's absolutely beautiful here, and I'm sure the residents here like it. But finding ways to make sure that we really show to people that we're delivering them value. Because if you don't show you're delivering value, your pricing gets under pressure. And the strongest way for us to deliver greater performance for you is to maintain that value proposition and to maintain the ability that we can sell new units and resell old units so that the people who come in as new residents go, I'm prepared to pay $750,000 for this unit, or $1 million or $1.5 million at some of our flagship ones, rather than $650,000 or $700,000. And that's the way that I think that we can, as a board, and I certainly hope to make my contribution, deliver good results for you, and that's what drives me. So I think I hope that gives you a bit of insight into how I think and how I behave around the board table. I'll just say one other thing that I'd say, and you can be assured that this is not a board that's like the Politburo where we all say and think the same thing. There's very good level of discussion and debate on the key issues. We get along well, and it's collegial, and we bring a good attitude, but we certainly bring a diverse range of ideas and a diverse range of thoughts. Sometimes I think that drives Jeremy drives him to a slightly difficult space, but that's our job, and that's indeed, he of course responds in good nature and good form to that, and I think as a result we do get to high quality decisions. So look, I'm very happy to take some questions on more on my background or more on what I think from any shareholder. I see there's a question there.
Ruth Barrett, Benson, shareholder and resident.
Yes.
I would like to ask you, you explained that you think it's vital we produce good results, which
Yes.
is true. So, and that would attract people who know that. What about the corporate people, the share brokers and everyone else who's got big investments? How do you attract them?
Onto our share portfolio. Look, we've got a range of shareholders, and it's actually in the annual report, I can't remember it now. But overwhelmingly by number of shareholders, they're people like you, with relatively small holdings, important to you, but relatively small in aggregate. And then we've got a much smaller number of larger shareholders, particularly represented by KiwiSaver funds, like Fisher Funds Management, Milford, the big investment firms who manage superannuation fund money, KiwiSaver money. We talked about it before at the board meeting. I think it was about 95% of our shareholders, is that the number, are New Zealand domiciled? And perhaps Jeremy or Mark might say, what percentage would you say is institutional and large? About 30% by shareholder number or 30% by value? So 30, I don't know whether you heard that. So about 30% of the shares are held by those big funds. They're important because they do bring the capital, and they're very important at the points in time when we do capital raises. Because if we did a big capital raise to support the Arena transaction, which went very, very well, and we do need those big institutions to back us at that time. So I think the mix we've got in the shareholder group is pretty good. Any other questions? All right, well, look, thank you very much. I think Dan will take back the chair. I'll be back again to speak about the director remuneration shortly.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. I'll now read the resolution that Paul Ridley-Smith be re-elected as a director of Arvida. The board unanimously supports the re-election of Paul. And is there any discussion from shareholders on this resolution? Thank you. In order for the resolution to be passed, it must be approved by a simple majority of votes of those shareholders entitled to vote and voting on the resolution in person or by proxy. Can you please tick the box on your voting card to indicate the way you wish to vote on this resolution? I'll give you a couple of moments for that, please. Okay, in accordance with the company's constitution and the NZX listing rules, Michael Ambrose will retire at this meeting. However, Michael also offers himself for re-election. The board has determined that if Resolution 2 is approved, Michael will be an independent director for the purposes of the NZX listing rules. I'll now ask Michael to provide comments supporting his re-election.
Great, thanks Ant, and hello to everyone. Look, I think most of you here know me, but for those of you who don't, I was the creator and founding director of Arvida, and obviously chair the Audit and Risk Committee. Paul's talked a little bit about the future and the present and what we do. I'm going to focus on the past because this is the last time I stand up in front of you seeking reappointment or re-election, as this will be my final term. And when I was thinking about what Paul was saying and where we've been, I cast my mind back really 8.5 years ago when we first listed, but thinking actually the story goes beyond that, back to 2013 and 2014, where Jeff McPhail and I spent probably, well certainly for me, the hardest 15 months of my life bringing this business together. And I just really want to put a big shout out to those foundation shareholders. We had 240 foundation shareholders, and quite a few of you are in the room today, which is great to see. And those shareholders took an incredibly large leap of faith and backed us to make this happen. Along the way, they twice gave us a chunk of money that amounted to $4.5 million with absolutely no guarantees we'd even get to the start line. And if we did get to the start line, would the market take us on and would the IPO be successful? So I really want to acknowledge the guts, the faith, everything that those 240 shareholders, and including a big chunk of money, put out. And if it wasn't for their support, then I guess none of us would be here today. So it's fantastic that most of them, the vast majority, are still shareholders today. And in fact, many of them have actually increased their shareholding over the period of time. And I acknowledge your comments, Murray, about the dividends and interest that everyone was getting back in those days. And then I think of the journey we've been on since we did actually list. And I remember sitting with Bill McDonald, who was our inaugural CEO, who we appointed some 3 months before we listed. And sitting having a coffee with Bill, and he, just after we actually did list, he said to me, Michael, what does success look like in 10 years' time? What's the aspiration? What's the dream? How are you going to measure it in 10 years' time? And I think in virtually every way we sat down and discussed it, whether it be the number of villages we'd have, the types of business we'd have, the financial results we'd have, the culture that we deliver for our residents and our people, I think we actually ticked all of those boxes. Probably the only one we've really failed on is that we saw the share price being north of $2, which has been referred to today, which it did hit 2 years ago. And obviously factors are we're not there at the moment. But for me, we've still got 18 months left before we hit that 10-year anniversary, so I'm still hopeful, like all of you, that we will be at the $2 plus by that time. So look, I really would, I've enjoyed what we've achieved so far. I'm really proud of what the whole team has achieved in that 8.5 years, and as I said, it beats our expectations. So I welcome the opportunity to be re-elected today to continue to have an influence over the next stage of the Arvida journey. I will say that as Ant has outlined in his report, that we are going through a process of looking at board refreshment and succession. So clearly, as the first director appointed, I will be stepping down as a director at the appropriate time as we work through that process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Resolution 2, I will now read the resolution that Michael Ambrose be re-elected as a director of Arvida. The board unanimously supports the re-election of Michael. Is there any discussion from shareholders on this resolution? In order for the resolution to be passed, it must be approved by a simple majority of votes of those shareholders entitled to vote and voting on the resolution in person or by proxy. Can you please tick the box on your voting card to indicate the way you wish to vote on this resolution? I'll give you a couple of moments for that, please. Just turning to Resolution 3, I'll invite the Chair of the Remuneration Committee, Paul Ridley-Smith, to address the meeting on Resolution 3.
Thanks, Ant. I'll try and keep this brief, but I'll start with a mea culpa. We've got to bring this resolution again now because 2 years ago I didn't write it the right way the first time. In 2021, you kindly approved a shareholder pool of $640,000 per annum to be split among the directors. And I'd understood that would mean that in the from then until we had gradually increased the amounts paid per director up to the $640,000, we wouldn't need to come back for shareholder approval. But our very diligent General Counsel, Briar Malpass, who's somewhere in the room back here, pointed out that we'd made a bit of a mistake there. So in order to increase the amounts paid on a per director basis by broadly 5.6% increase from 2 years ago, which is an aggregate amount of $32,500, but still keeping within the $640,000 cap, we have to come back to you for approval. So strictly speaking, to be 100% clear again, the cap of 640 is not increasing, but the amount that we are seeking your permission to pay ourselves within that cap would increase by 32,500, or about 5.8%, sorry, I think I said 5.6, 5.8% increase from 2 years ago. In terms of, we did a full benchmarking exercise in 2021, and we have done another slightly more limited benchmarking exercise this year using data from the Strategic Paid Directors Remuneration Report. I'm happy to share this report with you or answer any questions on it, but I can assure you that the fees that we are proposing to move to actually pay are well within the reasonable bounds set by the market and are indeed less than paid by some of our competitor retirement village companies. Indeed, I think perhaps all, but I'd better be a bit careful of that, certainly 2 of the 3. So that's the reason for the resolution this year. Very happy to take questions on any matter related to the director remuneration or indeed remuneration questions directly across the company. Any questions on that? Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So Resolution 3, I'll now read the resolution. The director's fee pool was last set in 2021. It is proposed that $32,500 of the $83,000 previously allocated to ad hoc fees outside the scope of typical board work be reallocated to increase the amount of remuneration payable to all directors for scheduled board and committee meetings. I'd note that Paul gave the meeting an opportunity to raise questions, so that in order for the resolution to be passed, it must be approved by a simple majority of votes of those shareholders entitled to vote and voting on the resolution, in person or by proxy. Can you please tick the box on your voting card to indicate the way you wish to vote on the resolution? I'll give you a couple of moments for that. Okay, turning to Resolution 4. This resolution is sought to authorise the directors to fix the remuneration of the auditor. Please refer to the explanatory note in the notice of meeting. I will now read the resolution. That the board be authorised to fix the auditor's remuneration. Is there any discussion from shareholders on the resolution? Thank you. In order for the resolution to be passed, it must be approved by a simple majority of votes of those shareholders entitled to vote and voting on the resolution in person or by proxy. Can you please tick the box on your voting card to indicate the way you wish to vote on this resolution? I'll give you a couple of moments for that. Thank you. Okay, that completes the voting on the resolution. Voting papers will now be collected by Computershare in the boxes being circulated. Provisional voting on the 4 resolutions is now being shown on the screen. The votes collected at this meeting will be added to the proxies already received, and the results will be compiled by the registrar. Final results will be provided to the NZX and published on the Arvida website on Monday. So now, ladies and gentlemen, just turning to general business, I'll now open the meeting to any general business questions from any shareholder, please. Again, I ask that in addressing the meeting with questions, please state your name and advise whether you are a shareholder, a proxy holder or a shareholder representative. Only shareholders, proxy holders or shareholder company representatives have a right to speak. Are there any general questions from the floor, please? Sir.
Hi there. Hello. Trevor Marshall, a shareholder. What's the view of the board and the panel in relation to what seems to be a bit of an attack on the industry by residents' associations and in particular this government, and the impact it's likely to have if a lot of the legislation comes in that they're proposing about cost sharing of capital gains, etc., the impact on the share price and actually profitability?
Jeremy is very active in that part of the market and representing Arvida in the sector, actually. Jeremy, is that something you'd like to address?
Yeah, so there's a MHUD, which is the Ministry of Urban Housing and Development, will be doing a review of the Act in the next wee while. Apparently they will release a discussion document goes to Cabinet, that sort of scopes out the scope of the review. We are led to believe that might get to Cabinet in August or September. Seems a bit of a strange time when you've got an election happening very shortly thereafter. But the outcomes from that review are likely to be that the Retirement Villages Act 2003 is modernised, so that's just bringing it up to date in terms of language and form. There'll be some removal of, there's lots of duplication between the Act and the Code of Practice, so those sorts of things will be ironed out. Consumer protections will likely be strengthened through the process, and that means things like having a complaints process that people can understand without having a doctorate degree will be implemented, because it's very convoluted. The issue you raised around sharing of capital gains is off the table. From our understanding, that is not something that will be part of the review. Probably the one that will be the most contentious is whether they look to bring in a mandatory buyback period. That's probably one thing that they'll look quite hard at. I think the market here operates quite effectively and efficiently, even in times like now when there's a slowdown in the residential housing market. So what the RVA is doing is we've always striving for best practice in terms of the operators. So, things like stopping fees on vacant possession. About 76% of the villages in New Zealand already do that. So there's a lot of things that might be part of the review, like stopping fees at vacant possession, but most people are doing it anyway, so those things might be included too.
Good question. Are there any other questions from the floor, general business? Sir.
Thank you, Charlie Hayne, shareholder. I just didn't want to let the team down by not asking a question. I'm just interested with the ORA agreements. Have there been any changes over the last year or so? And for Arvida, do you use the same agreement across all your facilities? And is it the same DMF across all the facilities? And just one other question. You've got 2 facilities named Park Lane. How do you get on any confusion around that?
Okay, so we'll start with the Park Lane one. Park Lane here is spelt with 2 words, and Park Lane in Auckland is actually spelt with 1 word, so it's quite easy. What's a lot harder is that we've got a Mayfair in Christchurch and a Mayfair in Auckland, but we cope. In terms of our ORA contracts, they are the same contracts across all villages within the group. They have the same fees in them, and they have all the same terms and conditions. So we implemented the current standard ORA back in 2016, which includes things like stopping fees on vacant possession and all those other sort of good practice things that are coming to the fore now. Was there another part of that question that I forgot, Charlie? DMF at 30% is the same across all of our sites for the new contracts. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of legacy contracts that we may have acquired. And then for the only real difference is for a care suite product, if you move from within the village or within the group, we'll cut the DMF in half from 30% to 15%. But if you're coming in new from outside the community, it's 30%.
Barbara McDonald, I'm a shareholder. This question, or this statement really, is slightly lighter in heart, but when I first became a shareholder, I was interested in all of the retired aged homes, and I did look into quite a lot of it. And it's a wee bit topical at the moment, I should say, because at the moment, well, I rang every retirement home. And the question I asked was actually, do you have wool carpets in your facilities? And it was interesting because Arvida were the only ones.
We really like retired farmers in the community, so thanks very much.
And I'm probably speaking on behalf of a lot of retired farmers and active farmers who are currently very upset by the government spending so much money and putting plastic, nylon, carpet in schools.
Yep.
And that burns down quicker. Those kids are going to have to run very fast.
Yep.
Fortunately, Arvida people won't need to run quite as fast as all the other homes if there's a fire.
That point is very well noted, and look, it's without being frivolous about it, there's a lot of passionate work going on in that particular space at the moment, and possibly the solution will be in innovation. You can see some really innovative products coming out because the traditional wool product is really struggling. So the point's well made, and I'm glad we were the group that you picked because we've got wool carpets. Thank you. Any other questions from the floor, general business? Okay, well look, if there are no other questions, I would like to thank you for your attendance and participation at this year's meeting of Arvida Group. And to close the meeting, a copy of the meeting presentation and addresses will be available on our website. You're welcome, please, to join the board and the management team downstairs in the Nattercaf now for some refreshments. Thank you very much.